Everyone calls Malcolm in the Middle a nostalgic sitcom, but strip away the laugh track and it's a live feed of an unmedicated, clapped household. 7 family members, 1 evil grandmother, and 7 perfectly documentable severe psychological disorders. Let's start with the matriarch running this psychological containment zone, Lois. Let's kill the sitcom myth right now. For 20 years, pop culture has handed Lois the exact same lazy defense. She is just an overworked, stressed out mother trying to survive 4 clapped kids. But watch her behavior when the stress is completely removed.
Violent! Here, watch something wholesome.
Just look at her behavior in the mall parking lot. Another driver dings her door and dismissively refuses to apologize. There is no immediate danger. Instead of de-escalating, she turns a mall parking lot into a slow-motion demolition derby.
Catch you, but you just slammed your door into my car. The least you can do is say you're sorry, lady.
She relentlessly rams her vehicle into the other woman's car until both are total scrap metal, fueled entirely by unhinged spite. That isn't a stressed mom. That is a woman who will destroy her own life rather than accept a reality where she doesn't have absolute interpersonal control. Notice the P. We aren't talking about counting steps or tapping a door frame. The DSM-5 defines OCPD as a rigid, pervasive preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, and interpersonal control at the expense of flexibility. Here is the clinical caveat. In documented OCPD cases, this condition is agonizing. Real patients suffer from severe, crippling anxiety because their perfectionism isolates them and ruins their own lives. Lois is the nightmare inversion. She doesn't suffer from her rigid obsession with control. She weaponizes it. For Lois, compromise isn't a struggle, it's a glitch in the matrix. Just look at the evidence from the iconic burnt red dress incident.
Well, that's gonna be the highlight of your evening, because nobody is going anywhere till one of you tells me who.
She doesn't discipline, she subjects her own blood to a psychological siege. A normal parent wants an apology to restore peace. Lois requires unconditional surrender. She thrives on the screaming matches because the chaos justifies her absolute dictatorship. She has to control every breathing atom in that house, which perfectly explains why her husband's brain decided to control absolutely nothing.
Her out on her cage.
Hell, we can't do that. She's my mother.
Starting with his profile, because it's one of the strangest in all of television. A middle-class father raises multiple boys in a chaotic house with no control on the record and no discipline he ever enforces. The audience watches this dynamic unfold over 7 seasons and comes out the other side with the laziest label in sitcom history. They diagnose Hal as simply a goofy dad. The writers designed him that way on the surface, harmless, submissive, but the behavior on screen stays weirdly consistent across every season, and it points somewhere specific. Hal physically shuts down the second adult life demands anything from him. He builds killer robots. He paints a massive masterpiece just to instantly destroy it. He speed walks down the track in a skin-tight suit.
Here's a little project we have been working on around here. A secret, deadly project.
When the crushing weight of his existence peaks, he abandons his job and his responsibilities. He goes to a theme park every single Friday, riding coasters and checking out the park lore, entirely detached from the absolute meltdown happening back at his house. Run his strangest behaviors through a clinical lens, and every one of them snaps into place. He builds robots because reality is too stressful. He speed walks because the physical task blocks out his family.
No one would discover your dirty little secret, didn't you? That clever little flail of the wrist every force.
He rides roller coasters because he is physically running from his own existence. The DSM considers the real version of this experience under the anxious personality cluster, avoidant personality disorder stacked heavily with ADHD. Avoidant personality disorder is a pervasive pattern of social inhibition and intense feelings of inadequacy. ADHD is a complete inability to regulate focus. Hal presents both at a severity that dictates his entire life. It even covers his most argued over trait. A man whose brain physically cannot process the reality of his own life can completely ignore a chaotic house and strap on sequined roller skates because responsibility belongs only to adults who actually accept their reality. One honest caveat, because it matters. In actual patients, this condition is agonizing. People live in deep, painful isolation, terrified of rejection, and they hurt no one. Hal is the nightmare inversion. Identical symptoms with the distress deleted. He weaponizes his avoidance into pure, unbothered bliss.
What are you doing? Aren't you pulling over?
I don't know. I think I'm still going.
Forget the standard teenage labels, the dense meathead, the neighborhood bully, the harmless troublemaker. All of it misses the mark. In the driver's education car, Reese is something the sitcom audience spends 7 seasons writing off. An apex predator. And his psychology is so specific that the clinical literature names it as the exact adolescent precursor to antisocial personality disorder. Let's look at the baseline, the student vehicle. A teenager gets behind the wheel and his brain completely bypasses basic human logic. He hijacks the car, instigates a high-speed police chase, and treats a multi-felony evasion like a casual joyride. When the show finally points to his daily interactions, we get the most honest look inside his head the series ever allowed. An unyielding pattern of deceitfulness, property destruction, violating the basic rights of everyone around him. Reese meets every single criterion. Even his daily interactions run through this need for dominance. The younger brothers, the Krauboins. He operates entirely on instrumental violence, and the show proves it. Layer his emotional dysregulation underneath. Cognitively, a brain wired for this level of destruction cannot regulate its own chaotic emotions unless it is actively dominating its environment. A feral kid running inside a suburban house with no baseline peace on sight to calm any of it. Which explains his strangest trait. The only time he finds genuine, regulated peace is when he exerts absolute, tyrannical control over a kitchen to cook a flawless Thanksgiving dinner.
I just like to stuff the acorn squash rings with roasted pepper and polenta. Sear this.
Before the chef hat, this was a kid who never knew how to calm down. So he carved a turkey. Reese breaks the rules because he thrives on the violence. The oldest brother breaks them just to spite the person who wrote them. Francis officially emancipates himself. Sit with that for a second, because it disqualifies almost everything the audience says about him. He legally wins his total freedom, leaves his mother, and travels thousands of miles. Audiences reach for the word rebel, but it dies on contact.
Are you sure this is what you want?
Better be.
A true rebel is defined by fighting an unfair system to win actual independence. Francis's dependence runs deep. Let's run the timeline. A strict military academy in Alabama, a freezing logging camp in Alaska, a dude ranch in the middle of nowhere. He leaves one oppressor just to trap himself under another, and the teenager who walks out of that house holds one behavioral loop for the rest of his life. Authority must be fought. That is the clinical definition of oppositional defiant disorder. The criteria state a persistent, vindictive pattern of hostile behavior directed exclusively at those in charge. And Francis's rebellion fails every test his own footprint provides.
This is what you get. This is what you get for the way you treated me. I'm going to Alaska, and you're...
You think he'd eventually enjoy his freedom. Instead, he immediately travels thousands of miles just to willingly submit himself to brand new tyrants. Look at his environments too, because they're a masterclass in forced submission.
Maybe I should just paint it the same color as your dye job. You sagging, leathery hatch.
He deliberately traps himself under Commandant Spangler and Lavernia. Every diagnostic marker psychologists have documented for how patients completely rely on defiance, Francis runs them daily. Here's the part that should stick with you. Oppositional defiant disorder destroys a real patient's life. That's why real people lose friends and get expelled. But Francis turns that miserable clinical reality into a lifestyle aesthetic. His brain is fundamentally addicted to being the victim. He needs a dictator to exist because without someone to scream at, he has absolutely no personality left. Francis screams his defiance at the top of his lungs, but the youngest brother never makes a sound. Look at the face of the ultimate sitcom victim. The lore tells you Dewey is just the innocent, neglected little kid, hopelessly trapped in the crossfire of his clapped family. But if you actually track his fingerprints across the series, Dewey is the most dangerous person in the entire house. He is operating on pure Machiavellianism. We aren't talking about a kid throwing a tantrum to get a toy. One thing you have to understand, Machiavellianism is a dark triad trait defined by cold, calculating manipulation and a total emotional detachment from the people you are exploiting. While Machiavellianism isn't a standard DSM-5 diagnosis, it is a core pillar of the dark triad of personality disorders. In psychiatric literature, individuals scoring this high in manipulation usually suffer from intense paranoia, constantly terrified that others will betray them first. Corporate psychologists see this exact profile every day. This is the guy in the office who quietly starts a rumor on Monday and then sits at his desk peacefully sipping coffee while the entire HR department burns to the ground on Friday. Dewey survives the Wilkerson house by playing 4D chess. He doesn't just dodge the abuse, he actively gaslights his parents and brothers into destroying each other so he can slip completely under the radar. But his absolute masterpiece is what he does outside the house. When the school accidentally places him in the emotionally disturbed special education class, my boy Dewey doesn't panic. He looks at a room full of unstable kids and instantly reorganizes them into his own personal mafia.
Everyone who hates this, follow me.
He detached his empathy years ago to survive, turning his neglect into absolute power. Dewey weaponized his intelligence in absolute silence. The middle child, however, weaponized his intelligence just to hear himself complain. Malcolm hands you his own psychiatric intake in the first 10 minutes of the show, breaking the fourth wall as he describes the universe revolving around his suffering. And for 2 decades, the audience has run the same debate over what to call him: misunderstood genius or trapped victim. Let's kill the genius question first. Clinically, his actual track record collapses into a dangerously fragile ego hidden underneath a massive victim complex. The misunderstood genius survives in the lore measured by a 165 IQ. And on the surface, Malcolm scores high, constantly complaining about cosmic injustice, zero accountability, and intellectual superiority. And then his actual behavior breaks the reading. Look at his relationships. Watch his face when a microscopic point comes up.
Anything that's nice, I can't do. Everyone in the world gets to do everything except me.
Malcolm burns through a full psychological stress response over a meaningless argument, the exact opposite of the calculated, unbothered genius he's famous for. His entire sense of self hangs on whether everyone acknowledges he is the smartest person in the room. He actively self-sabotages every single opportunity he gets, whining that he is way too smart for his job, desperate to finally be validated. That track record sits completely outside the genius profile. The clinical literature has an exact name for this build. The psychologists call it vulnerable narcissism, widely considered the most insufferable personality structure a human being can carry. A fragile ego hidden underneath a massive victim complex, and Malcolm holds all of it. A narcissistic core, intellectual superiority wrapped around self-esteem so fragile, a meaningless argument can crack it. And this diagnosis explains the self-sabotage better than the victim complex ever could, because every mistake maps onto a narcissistic injury. He alienates girls and nukes his own friendships over a better argument and the need to be right. The relationship detonates precisely where the ego takes damage. Best of all, the show's famous fourth wall changes nothing. Whether the complaints are justified or just an elaborate whine, vulnerable narcissism still applies to both.
It turns out she hasn't had a TV in 12 years, And instead of chemicals, her dry cleaner used...
Malcolm complains to the camera. He tells the audience out loud, and the universe is too indifferent to hear it. This is a vulnerable narcissist's worst nightmare. He thinks he is a victim of his environment, and nobody cares. He complains to the camera, but true malice just destroys.
You'd like that, wouldn't you? Yeah, you can't wait to get your hands on my things.
Now, you have to admit, sitcom grandmothers are supposed to be the quirky, slightly offensive, but ultimately harmless elders of the family. Grandma Ida is the nightmare at the absolute bottom of the Wilkerson family tree. She doesn't have a tragic misunderstanding or a bad day. What she possesses is severe sadistic personality disorder. This diagnosis is defined by egocentric sadism, meaning her cruelty isn't a mistake. It feels completely natural and right to her. She actively extracts joy from inflicting psychological and physical pain on her own bloodline. Here is the ultimate dark truth about this diagnosis. Sadistic personality disorder was actually removed from later editions of the DSM. Why? Because psychiatrists found it was too heavily linked to extreme, incarcerated psychopaths to be used as a standalone label. The medical world literally decided this level of calculated cruelty belongs in a maximum security prison. Ida walks free, turning her own bloodline into her private containment zone. Look at the pure, calculated evil of her actions. When she comes to visit and slips on a few leaves in their driveway, she doesn't just ask for an ice pack and move on. No. She ruthlessly sues Lois and Hal.
With all their teeth-sipping wine, these are real people. You will not embarrass me.
She actively attempts to bankrupt her own poverty-stricken family just to watch them suffer. She absorbs pain and converts it into pure, unadulterated hatred. She is the origin point of the family's generational trauma, a black hole of misery that proves exactly why Lois had to become a dictator in the first place. So, 7 perfectly accurate DSM-5 profiles for the most toxic family on network TV. Tell me which diagnosis you would overturn in the comments, and consider subscribing if you enjoyed the dark truth.